Data Science Festival. So this afternoon session, my name is Patricia and I'm the host for this room. There's a couple of announcements before we begin. So first, mobiles. So if you switched it back on, if respect for the speaker and fellow attendees, if you can put it on silent, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. There is a competition running at the moment to win £500. And it's a case of, if you haven't already had your popcorn, if you can take a selfie of the popcorn and post it to LinkedIn and tag MCube and the Data Science Festival and use the hashtag DSF Mayday, you have a chance of winning £500. Okay, and at 5 p.m., 5 till 6, there will be networking drinks following the last session. So please hang around and continue the conversation. Okay, our first speaker this afternoon is Samantha Ahern from UCL. The talk title is AI, Integrity and the Academy. Samantha Ahern is a senior digital research trainer and education code lead for advanced research computing at UCL. Samantha also leads the ARC research theme, Transforming Research Communities, is also a STEM ambassador, a fellow of the University of London Centre for Online and Distance Education, a member of the Society of Research Software Engineers working group, a carpentries instructor and trainer, and also co-chair of the Software Carpentry Lessons Programme Governance Committee. Samantha is also co-author of the Learning Technologies Anti-Racism Tool, has recently contributed to the Code Navigating the Future project, and has previously published papers focusing learning analytics and student well-being. With a talk titled AI, Integrity and the Academy, please give a warm welcome to Samantha Ahern.
Hello. So AI, Integrity and the Academy. So a bit of context. I am a computer scientist and a social scientist. My background is computer science. I work with some incredibly smart people, provisioning research compute across UCL, including research software engineers. My research is in education. I'm also on the Research Ethics Committee for the Institute of Education. I'm a former information security officer. So I have that horrible bit of my master's degree was in AI. I'm also suitably paranoid because I know all the things that could possibly horribly go wrong. And I know the social impact because I'm a social scientist, and I've looked at this in education. The picture is from earlier this year. So I did an apprenticeship on professional coaching as well. So I'm a lifelong learner. So I'm going to kind of tell a bit of a story. And I'm actually going to start with the higher education context, because this is the bit that you don't see. It's the bit behind the headlines. So on the left, you've actually got HESA data. The top bit talks about home students. And we talk about this massification of higher education, that those numbers have grown quite substantially. But the income fee we get per student has stayed flat. But with that, we also need to provision a lot more in terms of resource to teach them. And on the bottom is kind of around the applications in from the regions. So the home has gone up. It's gone up 64% between 1994 and 2023. The EU has kind of gone up, but actually in the last 3 years, in the last 13 years post-Brexit, that's dropped by quite significantly by 51%. But everyone else has gone up by 104%. So at the moment, UKHE, to maintain its budget, which is kind of what's on the far side, is pretty much dependent on international students. Without international students coming and studying at master's level, and without master's level study, we can't currently balance the books. Okay, and that's the basic economics of it, that we are dependent on that. At the moment, though, we also have a government that aren't particularly keen on the international students and visas and things, and they are putting restrictions in place which make it interesting in that they've created a system where we are dependent on international students. They're also making it quite toxic and difficult for us to have international students. And in the mix of all that, you've also got things around the situation in higher education. So you've got things around workloads, which have intensified quite considerably in there. Real-time losses in pay, that there isn't equal pay and so on. So you've also got this kind of workforce that are disgruntled, aren't being remunerated and being increasingly put under pressure. So you've got quite a bit of pressure in this system that you wouldn't necessarily always see. And it's one of these VUCA systems, and by VUCA I mean it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and there's levels of ambiguity. Okay, and that runs through the sector, and it runs through society, but things are becoming increasingly volatile and uncertain. You know, COVID caught everyone on the hop, and there had to be a massive pivot to us deliver online. We then had to pivot to teaching back on campus or trying to do something in between, because there was a big push to get us to bring students back onto campus when we'd actually pivoted to teach everything online, and then we had a weird bit of, we sort of came on campus and then we had to go online again and stuff, and there were massive costs incurred in some of that, and changes to estate and reuse of buildings and things, and it was quite tricky. But then in that, we've also seen things like Ukraine and Gaza and so on. So it's increasingly complex. And then feeding into that, and this is kind of the work that I did in Navigate the Future project, we looked at the broader scope of things and the things that we thought were actually going to impact moving forwards. And these are things around digital inequalities are still quite broad, both within the UK. There's still trendy bits of East London that are still a bit on copper wire. We're not fully on broadband. If you go into rural areas, it's not there. We know that actually globally, most people are using mobile devices. We know that during COVID, in some parts in Africa, you know, they were sending packs out. They were using radio or TV, or they weren't even using that. Ongoing environmental crises and weather. We have AI, which brings all kinds of interesting things. There's geopolitical inequalities, which is this. Actually, that shouldn't be inequalities. That should be instabilities, which is the chess set, because there's a lot of geopolitical things happening at the moment which are quite uncertain. So obviously, there's been the shooting in Slovakia. He was quite pro-Putin. You've got what's going on in the US with Biden and Trump, and we don't quite know how that's going to play out and what that means. And that's kind of quite uncertain. It also means that people aren't quite so willing to move, or they might move more than we want them to, which is where this unplanned movement come in. And this all affects the higher education system. It affects if we're doing remote delivery, distance education, if students are going to come to us, if we need to think of other things, if there's going to be any other kind of lockdown or issue, or things that are actually going to affect our students when they're with us in the institution. So there's quite a complex system going on in there. And now I want to touch on AI. And AI isn't new, certainly not new to the academy as we see it. It was pretty much an academic endeavour. So what you see is Turing's paper, Computing Machinery Intelligence, from 1950. In the middle is the Dartmouth group photo from 1956, where AI, actually I think it might be 54, where AI was coined, where that term came up. And then you've got the paper around the first form of neural networks in there. And in the bottom, I've written about approaches. So 10 years ago, I was in this building, and I gave a talk on the philosophy of AI. And the philosophical approaches to them were actually around AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is what we're talking about here, which was symbolic constructivist, and Nouveau AI, which was Rodney Brooks's idea of self-organizing systems that came out of his MIT lab in the States. So in terms of academia, AI isn't a new thing, and it presents in many different ways, and it was, certainly for a long time, a purely academic endeavor. And you'll see this, because you've got this history of AI graph. So you've got Dartmouth and the Queening, we've got ELIZA, which everyone thought was amazing and might, you know, actually fool people on the Turing test. I remember playing with a form of ELIZA in the early 90s, it was quite fun, and so on. And things like, actually around about here, Jürgen Schmidhuber started doing some really interesting stuff with LSHTM and this idea of deep learning. We couldn't actually do it till the noughties, but actually it's a 90s idea. So a lot of this conceptually isn't particularly new. We tend to get very excited, and then we kind of realise that maybe it's not quite as exciting as we think it is. But we're here, we're on the up, and things are slightly different. Because, one, it is something that's marketable, and has captured imagination. It's now become business. It's kind of gone away from this, oh, it's nice and it's niche and it does a thing, but it's become pretty much a business thing with it. And that's well and good, but there are approaches to things that don't always quite coincide with things that are a bit slower in their nature. So this is where we are. And actually, it's also not a new thing in terms of deployment in tertiary education. So Bolton have been using a chatbot for the last few years. There's some nice adaptive learning systems for 2018, and we've been talking about personalised learning for a very long time. Netflix for education, it's not something I particularly like the thought of, but it's been around. Arizona have been using, Cold Books 2014. Gradescope and Grade use machine learning, so you mark something, it learns how you marked it, and then it auto-grades a bunch of things, and you can double-check it. Digital accessibility tools are there. We really love transcription and captioning. Makes life a lot easier. I still have to go fix it. It still takes me 7 hours to fix an hour, but I don't have to write it in the first place. We're playing with VR and AR. An awful lot in dentistry education, actually. Allows you to kind of talk to patients and do things that you wouldn't normally do. And learning analytics has been a field for about a decade now, and that's kind of where my research was. So it's not a new thing in its broader sense, AI. So it's not something that we've never heard of in academia. It was an academic thing. We have had practical implications for it. So, integrity. So, the Oxford English Dictionary, there are several definitions of this, but this is the one that makes the most sense, is soundness of moral principle. Okay? So it's the character of uncorrupted virtue, especially in relation to truth and fair dealing, uprightness, honesty, and sincerity. And certainly in higher education, we think of this in two terms. We think about it as academic integrity, which predominantly relates to assessments, and we think of it in terms of research integrity, and that leads into the broader world. So, academic integrity. So this is being honest in your academic work, making sure you formally recognise and reference existing knowledge and ideas on the work that you are based. And there are things that you can do to show good academic practice. So being honest and ethical, ensuring that all of the work is your own, giving credit to the work of others, that your thoughts are distinct from those of others. You might see we're going to hit a few problems in a minute, including referencing, citing, and correctly attributing material and its sources. There's a flip side to that, and this is assessment security. And this is actually the thing that most institutions are worried about. We talk about integrity, but actually 99% of the time we're talking about security. A big thing are essay mills. They only became illegal a couple of years ago, in 2022. Until that point, it was perfectly legal to sell a student an essay that wasn't their own work. The student would then get expelled from university, but the actual act of selling essays wasn't a problem. And I'm going to just quickly play you this video from QAA.
As we look beyond the disruptions brought about by COVID-19, many providers are looking to continue to deliver assessments online. Finding new ways to allow students to take their assessments off-site safely while ensuring the integrity of the assessment and reducing the risk of academic misconduct has become of paramount importance. In this video, we consider some of the implications of these new security measures. Digital assessment security is a broad term for systems which try to simulate supervised exam conditions in digital assessments, and thus seek to verify that work completed is the student's own. Examples include forms of identity verification, video invigilation, and restrictions for devices on which tests are being taken. The advantage of digital assessment security methods like online invigilation is that assessments can take place anywhere where the student can access the test, while their course provider can assure themselves that conditions are appropriately controlled. Students will face less disruption, and providers can continue to run their courses without putting their students and staff at risk by bringing them into close proximity in exam halls, for instance. While the use of online invigilation tools can be beneficial, there are, however, a number of challenges that remain cause for concern and need to be addressed. These include issues around student consent, increased pressure on assessment candidates, and uncertainty for those negotiating exams and carrying responsibilities simultaneously. AI biases such as misidentification, facial recognition problems for students of colour and trans people, and potential discrimination against Muslim women and others are also of serious cause for concern, with potential legal implications. While providers are naturally worried about the security of assessments, making sure that the student body is adequately protected and provided with sufficient time and support to test solutions and fully appreciate their functionality is of vital importance. In late 2020, we asked providers and PSRBs to tell us the approaches they were implementing or considering. Half of the providers we spoke to were using some form of ID authentication or online invigilation, and were engaging with their students to minimise impacts. While the PSRBs were in the main leaving these decisions to their accredited course providers, they had a mix of positive and cautious views about the solutions available. Our follow-up piece of work was a scan of international practice, which suggested providers around the world are at least considering, if not fully adopting, some of these methods. What is missing is sector-level advice, with only Australia having any information for their HE institutions on strategic approaches to online assessment. As part of our QAA membership offer, we have published advice to help providers consider the best approaches to take in digital security, concentrating on the principles they should apply when thinking about invigilation, talking to and supporting their students, and procuring the most appropriate products. To access this new advice, which is voluntary and should complement any activity by UK regulators, please visit our membership resources website.
Yeah, you don't need to know about that bit. Has anyone actually done an online proctored exam? Was it fun? No, it's awful, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. So I did it. I had to do it as part of my apprenticeship. I had to sit there in a room on my own, turn my laptop around to prove that I was there completely on my own, show them where I'd physically put my mobile phone. I couldn't actually move for 2 hours. I couldn't even go to the bathroom because it was an online proctored exam. It wasn't like a real exam. Some of them require students to set up cameras in multiple points of the room and monitor them. You can't be seen to be looking at something because they assume that you are looking at something that you're not looking at, and it's incredibly intrusive. It's really stressful because someone's asking you to tilt a camera and go, it's my laptop. The camera's at the top. I can do nothing about the angle of the camera and so on, and it's not nice. But you can see that there's a degree of paranoia in higher education about assessment and about students doing their own work. And this is pre-OpenAI releasing GPT 3.5. So this was the context beforehand. Okay. Oh, I don't want to do that. Right. Okay. Right. Hand in hand with that, we have research integrity. And UK RIO, which is the national office the government set up around research integrity, says research integrity refers to all the factors that underpin good research practice and promotes trust and confidence in research processes. It covers all disciplines in research in all sectors where research is carried out. And it's about that whole life cycle, initial idea, design of the product, conduct, and so on. So it's about the research culture that we create in there. And there are numerous dimensions to this. There are things around honesty in how we go about the research, the planning methods, the data collection, and so on, our rigor in our methods, our interpreting our data, our conclusions, how we deal with colleagues, that everyone's involved, and how we go about sharing our results, and so on. And this is kind of required because in 2016, a survey of over 1,500 scientists by Nature found that 70% of researchers reported they tried and failed to reproduce another scientist's experiments. So we can't reproduce an experiment. And a reproduction is that if we do the same method with the same data, we should come out with the same thing. And we can't. Okay? There was a lot of issue around psychology papers and p-hacking. And p-hacking, you know, is that actually you just run tests till you get a significant result that you want, and you'll just keep running it. So I was running a drop-in session. I was teaching stat software and had this PhD student come in. She goes, what analysis should I run on my data? I go, well, what's your research question? She goes, I don't know. My supervisor just told me to collect the data. And I'm like, well, okay. You need to come to me with a question, because what's the point? And also I don't really want to run a random bunch of tests on something to come up with something significant, because it's not kind of good practice. And this is also kind of important because in this landscape, we also have REF, which is the Research Excellence Framework, and this looks at the impact of papers. And money on quality research is divvied up based on your REF impact score. Okay, so the number of high-quality papers you produce depends how much money you get for research and how much people want to work with you and how much you're going to get from various governing bodies. So there's quite a bit of pressure in here to do good research and do a reasonable amount of research. And this is where actually the higher education sector is very much about process. It's about that process of learning and that process of students in their assessment. It's also very much about that process of research. It's about how you go about that research and those steps that you take to uncover that new knowledge. That's what kind of those bits on that research integrity path do. But what we're seeing is we're seeing a push towards product. We're seeing students that are increasingly concerned about their grade, being incredibly strategic about when they come to lectures, what coursework they do and when. We see a lot of financial pressure. You know, just the fees now for a home student, if it's a 3-year degree, are about £29,000 before you even start with living cost loans. Our home master's fees are now £21,000 for a 1-year course because there's no cap on those. And these are the new ones at UCL East. And certainly on the staff side, there is this real push to publish. You know, your ability to gain promotion both on the academic and research pathway is about your grant applications and can you do those and can you get these papers out and so on. So it becomes, for something that is very much process, it's becoming incredibly product driven because of all those conflicting things. And then the technology landed. Large language models landed in this already volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous landscape where things were kind of already a little bit broken. And unsurprisingly, there was fear. And most of that fear is around assessment. And the Russell Group wrote a piece around this. And they talk about becoming AI literate and equipped to use generative AI tools effectively and appropriately and so on. But also this piece around, there was a big proliferation of AI detection software. And about a year ago, Turnitin wanted to put this in their product with no off switch. And it isn't great, and we know it produces false positives, and it does it a lot, more so than expected on non-native English speakers. So it generates too many false positives on them. And there has been so much guidance. King's have produced a plethora of guidance. I co-wrote a student-facing course on this. There's pushes towards AI-proof assessment. I don't actually know how you're going to AI-proof an assessment, sort of sticking a student in an exam hall and making them write for 3 hours. But that's kind of where things are going. But there's also concerns around student use and lack of criticality around there, but also equity of access. So some of our students are from varying backgrounds. Some of them have more access to things than others. And we actually, last autumn, we ran a research software engineering with Python module, and we kind of went, okay, so we got Microsoft Copilot available to us as Edge staff. We got it as the trial. Let's see what it does. And we're like, it's all right. It's not great, but it's all right. I know all the things they're going to come up against it. Once they tell me to input JSON, but it's already in Python, so whatever. But we said they could use it, but they could only use free things. But we wanted them to tell us why they were using it. And some of the things they said was actually, we want to see what we can do. We have a lot of non-native English speakers as students, and some of them just needed a little bit of extra help around some of the context of things. They didn't understand necessarily object orientation and so on. Some of them used it to generate the syntax, get some examples. Some of them found that it generated things that weren't right, and it contained errors, and it didn't match what they were trying to ask it. And then they had to change a lot of things. But also we found in the module, in the live lecture, the students were live translating all the time. Whereas in previous years, they would have had to develop their English skills to ask us questions. They were actually live translating on their machines in real time and mostly speaking in their native language, which meant that actually when some of them came to do the group work, they found that incredibly difficult because they hadn't practiced their English skills. They got lower marks in the group work because actually they were only talking to their peer from the same background as them and not to the rest of the group. And when they were asking questions in class, it was quite difficult because we're having to have a 3, 4, 5 question conversation that normally by that point in the academic year would have been a lot simpler because they would have practiced those language skills. So if everyone's doing it, great. If you've got a small pocket of students, then actually they're becoming a bit more isolated in that they're not practicing skills and they're not engaging with the rest of the cohort in the same way. But we kind of forgot about the academics, right? Everyone got really worried about students and cheating. And then some friends of mine, Donna and Laurie, with a professor from Bristol, thought, let's actually ask our academics what they're doing. And, 51%, 52% were actually using it. Most of them expected it to change how we work, and that's fair. And that there's talk about this taking the pain out of admin, and they say health and safety or ethics. So, yeah, let's just get a Gen AI LLM to write our ethics report for our research. There's nothing wrong with that. We can, subcontract the thinking. We can just summarize reports. It's great. I need to do a fellowship thing. So this fellowship thing is your professional standards for teaching in higher education. That's the thing that says you know what you're doing when you stand up in front of students and mark their work. Yeah, it just generated my reflections. So all the things we were worried about students doing, our staff are doing even more so. And then some literal subcontracting in there. And this is actually kind of where it comes down to, and this is the thing, is that it's a way to save money and resources in a challenging sector. So we've already seen that there are kind of workload concerns. We've seen that budgets are tight. And when it comes down to efficiency, it's like they're great, you can do this faster, we can get you to do more work. And it really kind of pushes that bit of it becomes the product and not the process. So it's kind of exacerbating something. And we've already seen this happen, overlooking things and chasing publications. And this is why Rio exists. This is why we've got kind of a reproducibility crisis and why there's concerns around p-hacking in there. And you've got companies advertising I'll show you how you can do your systematic review in a fraction of the time. Just throw your data in and we'll do the analysis for you, and you need to know nothing about statistics or programming. You don't need to know how it works. We'll just give you an answer. And as I said, in a sector where it's all about process, that's not great. And then there are a bunch of ethical concerns. Okay, this is this was. So I fellow the Centre for Online Distance Education, and they have a RIDE conference, which is Research and Distance Education every year. And I persuaded them to get Richard, Donna, and Laurie to do the keynote. And this was kind of how they started it. This is the bit of, they wanted to acknowledge things. So this is actually this bit of, this authorship bit, right? Because we know they've scraped data. We know it's from this bit. We don't know who it was. We can't reference it in there. And this is kind of what causes us problems, right? If I'm going to use these tools to help me produce a research output, if I go back to that research integrity thing, and I'll show you in a minute, I can't do half of those things because of this. But it's acknowledging what's gone on behind the things that we don't see. And these are the things that I want our students to see when they're going to be designing these new systems. I need them to know this. You may have seen this, that Stack Overflow are given OpenAI their data, which was collected on the CC by SA license. And we're not entirely sure actually how that's going to work in a large language model, in that it might actually be a breach of the Creative Commons license. But an awful lot of people are withdrawing their information from Stack Overflow. That trust, that relationship with Stack Overflow is now gone in there. And it's about that attribution piece, that authorship piece, because we don't know where it's from. And if we really want to get into stuff, we can talk about the environmental impact. So we know that most data centers use water cooling. Only 39% actually track their water usage on it. Just over 10 years ago, Thames Water did an investigation into data centres in and around London because they were actually taking water out of the drinking supply and causing issues, additional issues. Researchers at University of California estimated that training GPT-3 in Microsoft's US data centres directly consumed 700,000 litres of water in a month, roughly, just during the training period. And that did not include the indirect water use associated with electricity generation. They also calculated that every short conversation of 20 to 50 questions and answers represents about half a litre of water. It gets worse when you do images in there. We also know that power consumption, that data centres a few years ago were equating for about 2% of the total power in the US, and about 200 terawatt hours per annum, roughly. Things like crypto consume far more power. And the VU Amsterdam School of Business and Economics predicts that by 2027, just the AI part alone will be using more energy than the whole of the Netherlands in the data centers and so on. And the piece in the model here is actually a gold mine. I mean, we have problems with actually just building the tin, the graphic cards. I was saying earlier that 8 years ago, I was doing a hackathon in The Hague for the Dutch government, and we were looking at the movement of illegal gold through Africa and what that funds and how paperwork was falsified. Same problem in South America, and it gets into legitimate supply chains. So our thirst for new hardware is causing a lot of problems. It's driving that geopolitical instability. That power and water consumption is driving climate change, and they're people, and that's mostly going to hit people in the global south that are already in precarious environmental situations. So it's kind of bigger than us. And this kind of also feeds into that. So what we haven't done is, we worried an awful lot about what the students were doing on assignments. We didn't think about what our staff were doing, and we hadn't really thought about what was happening in terms of research and what that meant for research integrity. So I ran a workshop just before Easter as part of the Turing Fringe on that, and we kind of unpicked a bunch of questions. And there were things that come up around authorship and the nature of authorship. If you think of all the generative AI tools, what are their kind of implications and limitations in the research pipeline? Certainly, if you are using it to summarize text, we don't know what it was trained on. We don't know what the questions were. We don't know what the assumptions were. We have no idea what epistemological framing was. So when you've got qualitative work, how do we know where that's come from? How do we know how that meaning was derived? And we don't. And there's a difference between an AI tool being part of the research question and short-circuiting that research process. And what we're seeing is a bit of short-circuiting of the process, which will ultimately lead to poor research. It also then, certainly when you're doing qualitative research, you're looking at sources. And because we've got a plethora of generated content that we can't determine the digital provenance of, the BBC spoke to the Royal Society of the year, and we can't do it. Without massive privacy implications, without massive tech buy-in, we just can't do it. So that causes, again, another issue. And then this is kind of where I go, where actually, with all these things, given what's on behind the tool, can we properly, ethically, and with genuine integrity, use something that flawed in our research process in there? And then I bring it back to this. So we can't really interpret the data very well. If we're getting it to draw our conclusions for us, then we're not doing the rigor ourselves. We're breaking all of this process and this sense of integrity because it's not us and it's not our thinking. And I said it's a process thing, not a product thing. So CORI, which is the UK Committee of Research Integrity, are aware that there are things that we need to research. We need to think about the governance of this, of generative AI, especially in the research process. What are the roles and responsibilities of people? That there needs to be skills and training, that people need to know what it is and what it can do and what are the limitations. Public understanding and expectations. So what really is this stuff and what goes on behind it? There's been a bit of fuss on LinkedIn this week because Apple have put a patent in for the headphones, and it will collect the same biometric data as the Apple Watch. But you don't expect that in your earphones necessarily, and it's kind of this: what do you expect from something and when? There's questions around obviously attribution authorship, and this is where people got very upset with Stack Overflow. We don't understand the inputs in the models. We know that actually, if we look into this, the weights mean nothing. We don't really know what it's learnt, but we know it's learnt something. We can probably dig into that horrific multi-dimensional matrix if we want, but we're not sure. But we do know that we need to look at what this means in the longer term for research integrity. So there's a lot of promise that, this is a thing that is a good. But when you've got a system that's already broken, like the higher education system, where there's already so much concern about things, you're kind of making it worse. You're exacerbating those concerns around assessment, and we're seeing a regressive move in the design of assessments. We already have an issue around pressure to publish and concerns around the quality of publishing. Yet you're speeding up that process, and people are literally advertising things to shortcut that circuit. And when you've got places with budgets that are tight, and we had it landed. We had Copilot land in our Microsoft estate partway through term time, and it wasn't even announced. It was just kind of there. We're like, great. So we're midway through the term, we're midway through assessments, and we have Copilot and everything, but the students aren't allowed to use it. Awesome. That's going to be fun. So this is kind of my parting thought, really, in there, is that and this was Martin Luther King, and it's part of his papers that are stored, and he talked about education. He goes, the function of education, therefore, is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education which starts with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason but with no morals. And I'm going to let that resonate. So if you think about what's happening around academic integrity and research integrity, those are the efficiencies that we are seeing. And without that deep critical thinking, are we going to get the citizens and the science that we need for actually the better future that we want? Or are we not? Thank you. Right.
Thank you very much for the talk. Apologies, I only joined halfway through, but it was very interesting. I'm not sure if you talked about this within your talk, but what is a reasonable use of generative AI in academia? For example, I'll give an example what I may have done. I would write a piece of work or an essay, but I would check grammatical issues, I don't know, using ChatGPT. Would that be a piece of work generated by ChatGPT because I fed it into the system? Or would that be my work, which is, I don't know, there are punctuation changes or word changes which ChatGPT would give back to me?
So I say, why would you use ChatGPT for that when Word does a perfectly good job? And we know what the rules are for that, and everyone's agreed the rules. I'd say, why have you used a tool that is overblown? If it has changed the text, then that becomes an issue. But my question would have been, why did you use ChatGPT for it? Because it's why.
Yeah. This is gone are the days that me being in academia, I rarely touch it in my piece of work because I'm working with confidential information, client information. Yeah. But just an argument would be is just to check the flow of. I mean, it's not the best judgment of how you're writing as a flow, but just to check the flow of how you're putting in your argument. But I just wanted to know your perspective because you talked about the impacts and the implications. It'd just be good to have what is reasonable or what is a suitable use of generative AI in academia, or if there is one.
So we have a traffic light system. We have no use at all, some specified use, and go ahead, use it as much as you want. And that's up to the academic. But we've also got this change where actually we need to prove that 50% of the assessments across a program need to be AI proof and that we can 100% prove that you didn't. So there are things where if it is part of the question, So I teach research software engineering, right? If a student goes into the workplace, they're going to have Copilot in GitHub. There's going to be something in the IDE, right? There's always going to be something. So it makes no sense for us to say, oh, you've got to sit and use Notepad and that's it. So if they're using that in their code because it's a legitimate thing and it's a relevant thing to what they're doing, then that's fine. But we ask them to say why they've done it. If you are saying writing an essay about industry and society, and you put a prompt in and ask it to generate the essay, then that's not acceptable. Quillbot is a fine line between doing the grammar check you want and how much it will generate for you. So it depends on how much is you. If the argument is yours, then fine. And if you are just tweaking, but I'd rather just get a friend of mine to read the paper to check the flow, to be honest. I'm a bit old school in that respect. It depends on what the rule has been set. A lot of journals now, and I submit things to journals, I do peer reviews and so on, I have to specify whether I've used Gen AI at all. And if I say they won't publish a review if I've used it. So it varies. I mean, and there are bits where, if it's like on the research side, if it's a legitimate part of the research question, so we have colleagues in the Centre of AI and Computer Science that are actually using it to analyse research papers to see if you can identify things that they can't, and that is actual part of their research question, and that is fine. So if you're short-circuiting it on your systematic review, and you're asking it to summarise all these papers for you and publishing it, then that's not fine.
I do have a couple more questions, but I'll just give it to anyone else.
Does anyone have any questions?
One of your slides, there was a demarcation across two separate quotes, where one was from a pre-1992 university and the other was from a post-1992 university. What does that mean exactly?
Okay. So in 1992, polytechnics became universities. So your traditional universities are pre-92, and that includes the Russell groups. The post-92s are anything that have been created since, and a lot of them were former polys. What they haven't done is they haven't denoted whether it was a Russell group or not. And there's also a difference within the pre-92s as to whether they're Russell group or not as well.
So, how do you fix this academic integrity issue with GPT getting better every day? And it's not just GPT now. I mean, there's plenty of them.
Yeah.
So how do you?
We actually have quite a broken education system, full stop, in that if you actually look at, my niece has just sat her SATs. My sister was sending her to coaching to support her SATs. I know I taught secondary for a long time, and I knew students were hothoused in year 6 to get through their SATs. I know there were targets I had to hit at key stage 3 and 4, and they knew the school would lose funding and would lose its ranking if we didn't hit that target. And I know there were things that we did that technically weren't within the rules to make sure the student hit their target, because we've got a system that's all about student grades and student outcome, to the point now where actually we're just training them for exams. And I know in some schools, students aren't allowed to talk in a lesson unless in response to a direct question from a teacher at secondary. There's no peer talk, there's no discussion. It is literally you sit and you listen and you write and you will sit an exam. And that is translating through into secondary, that we're creating and we're creating this system now that is all about exam results and about that pressure to get an exam result. And when you have a system like that, and a system that's incredibly expensive, you then create this product, this outcome that becomes more important than the process of learning. And that's kind of where we've got to in that system. So there are things we can do in higher education. We can talk to students about what it means to have integrity in your work. But when they've been through an entire system, both here and abroad, we've kind of almost modelled the UK system now in South Korea, and that's kind of mildly terrifying, actually. Because only so many of them can get an A, and only so many can get into the top universities and so on. And they've started to roll some of that back. So until we fix some of those things, until we value the learning process again, it's going to be incredibly difficult. But I think we also need to recognise that actually some of this is okay, and that some of it is more useful to them to learn these tools and understand them and understand the implications of them, than to blindly kind of ban them and send them out into a world we're going to have to use it, but they're not going to understand everything around it. But yeah, we need to kind of fix the broader education system first.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question, which is, I don't know how to phrase it exactly, but so
Try. Have a go.
like this system's broken,
Yes.
right? And so, I mean, okay, I'm gonna say what I think
Yeah.
first. I think that university is not relevant anymore because, like, I can learn everything online. Like, I mean, I went to university, but I never went to class. Like, I just learned everything online, and I got my degree. And so, like, I don't think it's very relevant in this day and age. And like, if the system is already broken, like, why do we have university? Like, or should we change them to try to make them relevant anymore? Or is there like a point in changing them?
So this is my point, is that you've just demonstrated this, but you didn't have to go to class, you didn't gain any benefit from it. So what we're doing is just producing you to get a good degree. That's what needs fixing, but for you to think a bit more critically and a bit deeper and to have a broader understanding, and certainly when it comes to that research piece and that impact on society, then we do need that bit, because where else are you going to get it?
Gonna get like the what? The
That
knowledge or
process
what the
piece.
so-
That critical thinking and that learning about that framing and other things, where does that get taught?
Well, I think that like people just acquired that themselves. Like, I mean, so like just learned the reading papers, you know, like instead of like going to class, I read papers and like I just learned everything.
So where did you learn to question that paper and what that paper said and the framing of that paper and who wrote that paper and why did they write it and what was the influence of that paper that drove that outcome?
I think it's life really, because like, so when you start doing research, you realize that like how the system works, and like you start criticizing things more. Like, I think people really learn over their life experiences. I don't know, like
people don't, which is the terrifying bit.
I don't know. It's just an opinion, really. Like, I mean, but
I can clarify the answer to that. I've worked for consultancies for the last 4 years, and without a doubt, the people that I get coming in as apprentices rather than graduates, there is a distinct difference. Because people who are apprentices haven't been taught to answer questions. They've been trained to do things. And that is a critical difference in it. So where you've come from, you've gone and found out how to do the thing. It didn't work for you. Then you went to another video which told you what to do. As opposed to somebody who went to university who's been told.
I know he did go to university, but he didn't think it was
useful.
useful. Yeah.
What I'm saying is him, again, somebody who did go to university. You learned your own critical thinking because the first video you read didn't work. So you went to the next video, and then you eventually found how to make that thing work. Because you have to do the research, you have to do that. When you're in a university, I've had the same problem. I was working in the computer industry before I got my degree. I knew more when I went to university than I did when I left. Primarily because I was trained to think, to answer the questions, to get the result, as opposed to problem solve what was there. So what I'm saying is, when you have a situation like yourself who hasn't gone to, well, you may have gone to university, but you didn't do it, you weren't conditioned, as I would call it. So I've seen both sides on the way out, where I've had graduates work for me who have taken months to solve the problem. Whereas I've had apprentices who haven't been through the university system. They may be self-taught, or they have come in straight out of school and worked in the industry to get that relative experience with people who haven't. If that makes sense. So they haven't seen the videos, they've had somebody who should have made videos showing them, hang on, what you're coming wrong there is this.
Oh, so the question was, is university still relevant? And I would argue that it is, because there is a whole process that is incredibly valuable that you can...
Yeah, but the premise is that it needs to change to encourage that critical thinking and everything else.
It's like, sorry, apologies, I'm just butting in here, but with current government, everything's just becoming more numerical based. The change from A to E to 1 to 9.
So right, the defunding anything that isn't STEM as well, but... which is probably the most worrying thing.
Just for the benefit of people that have just come in, the next talk at 2 o'clock has been cancelled, so that would run from 2 to 2:45. So I don't know if Samantha was happy to stay and answer more questions. If anybody wanted to ask her some more questions, then that's okay. But after that, the next talk will start at 3:15 back in this room. But I'll hand it back to Samantha if she's happy to answer more questions.
If it's done right, it should be better than things. Yeah.
I just wanted to say I really like the quote in the end, which you gave, is because I'm sure many people who did go to university struggled with that aspect, because what you're doing during your period is tick boxing rather than actually understanding or learning the core arguments, because you've got like a bunch of, 5 different things thrown at you at the same time. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, thank you very much, Samantha.